Hi guys, it's Lou. I'm back for another video. Today I'm doing a thread response to something called, I think it's called Reverse Thread. And it was a thread that was started by, I think it was Mr. Hall of Fame. And I've seen some videos from Andy's Vinyl Den. Who else has done one? I think Vinyl Boy Trigger has done one. Garen in Omaha has done one. And the original thread was 5 bands or artists that I like that the rest of the VC doesn't like. And I'm going to tweak that a little bit to be 5 bands that I like that I rarely see shown in the VC. So it's not like other people don't like them, but I really don't see any videos, or rarely see any videos that include these bands. Now, these bands are by no means household names. They're not your Pink Floyd's, Led Zeppelin, Beatles, those type of bands, but certainly these bands are well-known bands. I think they're well-known bands, and they certainly have large followings. Many of these bands, they're latter-day bands, I think from the 90s and onward, for the most part, late 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And many of these bands do have large followings, most of them do, and a lot of them have actually headlined some major festivals like Bonnaroo and festivals like that. So I think for some of these bands, their popularity came at a time where vinyl may have been at its lowest point sales-wise. But certainly, I've got vinyl records for all these bands, and not only do I not see them shown in terms of vinyl, but I also really don't see any other format like CDs, for example. So I think most of you will know most of these bands, if not all of these bands, and certainly, again, I think they're not obscure bands by any sense. They're just not your Pink Floyd's, Led Zeppelins, and so forth. So just a sec here. Okay, so the first band is actually playing in the background, if you can hear it. If you can hear that bass. Those are the bass stylings of Les Claypool, who is the leader of this band, Primus. Primus was a band that started, I think, late 80s, early 90s, and certainly the 90s was their most popular period. 3 members in this band: Les Claypool on bass and vocals. You have Larry Lalonde, also known as Lur, on guitar, and in the classic lineup, Tim Alexander, who's also known as Herb, on drums. This is their first album, Frizzle Fry. I believe it's from 1990. For those of you that don't know, Les Claypool, in my opinion, is probably one of the best bass players out there. The band, I guess they've been described, their music has been described as a lot of different labels. Funk metal, I've heard. Your standard alternative rock, that sort of thing, but certainly funk metal. I can see that description because the bass is played very much as a lead instrument. A lot of jamming happening, and sometimes I think this band, all the focus goes on Les Claypool, and he certainly deserves it. And some of the other members get forgotten, especially Larry Lalonde on guitar. It's kind of, I heard someone once describe it, it's kind of like Alex Lifeson in Rush, who's a great guitarist, but he's sometimes the forgotten man just because Geddy Lee and Neil Peart get all the attention. But definitely, if you like your bass playing and you like that as your lead instrument up front, I highly recommend Primus. Primus has a fairly large fan base. They broke up for a while there in the 2000s and reformed, and have made 2 albums since their reformation. They were a big, one of the bigger bands in Woodstock '94. That was sort of at the height of their popularity. Excuse me. And as I said, this is their first album, Frizzle Fry. Their first two albums are probably their best albums, and I'll show the next one. But I highly recommend them if you like your bass playing up front. And again, listen to some live Primus on YouTube, and you'll see what I mean about Les Claypool and his bass playing. Primus's second album is Sailing the Seas of Cheese, and again, I think this and Frizzle Fry are their two best albums. I'd highly recommend this as well. These are available as reissues. Les Claypool had also during, I don't know if it was during their break, I think it was, they had actually reformed. He did an album with a friend of his. They were known as the Duo de Twang. And they did a lot of Primus covers and Claypool solo material on this. It's just Claypool on bass and vocals and his buddy on guitar. Very stripped down versions of Primus and the solo songs. And last but not least, Les Claypool's last project was with Sean Lennon, and they were known as the Lennon Claypool Delirium, and they came out with this album, excellent album. Primus had always an element of psychedelic tones in their music, but they really went for, this sounds like a psychedelic Primus, basically, in my opinion, this album. They did have a release for Record Store Day. I think it was a cover of Interstellar Overdrive, and I'm not sure what other cover. It was sort of a single, two-song single. I'd highly recommend it if you like some psychedelia thrown in there. Excellent album. It's actually better than the last Primus album, which was a cover album of, I guess, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, I think. But instead it was called Primus and the Chocolate Factory. I wasn't too fond of that one. The next band, again, I think fairly well-known band, and they have headlined Bonnaroo in the past. We have alt country band My Morning Jacket. This is probably their breakthrough album, I would say. So it was their third album, called It Still Moves. They're now on album number 7, which I'll show as well. Their more famous albums are this album, It Still Moves, the album after this, which was called Z. I think I may have seen that once or twice shown in VC. This is a band from Louisville, Kentucky, and again, they have quite a large fan base. Jim James being the leader of this band. A lot of their early stuff is alt country-ish with a lot of reverb on the vocals. Some of the songs sounded Neil Youngish, I would say, especially the earlier stuff. But they've branched out to a more diverse sound since then. But this is, in my opinion, still their best album, which was their third album, It Still Moves. I saw this band as part of Americanarama. One of the times I saw them, Americanarama, I think it was called Americanarama Festival, which was Bob Dylan, My Morning Jacket, Wilco, and Richard Thompson, a great 4-artist bill there. Their most current album is The Waterfall. It's a double LP as well. And another band who are currently no longer together. They were a big band in the. They started in the late '80s, but their heyday was definitely in the '90s. We have Pavement. This is their first album called Slanted and Enchanted. Probably their most well-known album is either this first album or the second album called Crooked Rain, Crooked Rain. That album had the hit, I suppose, called Cut Your Hair. And this band is most often associated with the, I guess, slacker rock of the early 90s there. Also called indie rock. They're from California, and they're led by Steve Malkmus, who has made a lot of solo albums since then. Great album, Slanted Enchanted and Crooked Rain. I've also got... when they reformed several years ago, a very successful reunion tour, they came out with this comp called Quarantine the Past, double album, which includes, I don't know, like over 20 songs, I would say. So I'd recommend this as a comp, or any of their single albums which have been reissued on vinyl, especially the one I showed before, Slanted and Enchanted, and also Crooked Rain, Crooked Rain. Another well-known band that I don't see in the VC, and this band probably is the most well-known of all the ones that I've shown so far. We have Wilco. And this is their most popular and critically acclaimed album called Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. This band did a very critically acclaimed and popular documentary on the making of this album when they were going through several lineup changes, and it was quite an excellent documentary, if I do say so. Probably one of my most favorites. It showed the making of this album, but all the troubles that the band had in trying to get this recorded, and members coming and going. This band, of course, is led by Jeff Tweedy, who used to be a member in another alt country band called Uncle Tupelo. He was in that band with Jay Farrer, who's now leader of Sunvolt. But Wilco is definitely the more popular of the two bands. And like I said, Wilco has a lot of fans, and this is definitely, in my opinion, their best album, but they've made several. Again, they headline a lot of festivals, and I think sell quite a lot of albums. And last but not least, this band is probably the least known of all the bands that I've shown. The former lead singer of this band is actually probably better known for her solo work than her previous band's work. That lead singer is Björk from Iceland, and she used to be in this band called the Sugar Cubes. This is the Sugar Cubes' first album and most popular album, Life's Too Good. It includes the song Birthday, which is probably their most well-known song. Also Cold Sweat, Motor Crash, they were some of the singles from this album. I think certainly Björk went on to greater success as a solo artist, but this is one fantastic album, and I think the Sugar Cubes are pretty well known, maybe more in alternative circles and so forth. Certainly less well known than any of the other bands that I've shown, but I don't see any Sugar Cubes. I think I've seen Björk shown a couple of times, a couple of her solo albums, but certainly her and this band are not very well represented out there in the vinyl community, either as vinyl or CDs. So there you have it. 5 bands that I love that I rarely see shown in the VC. Again, not household names by any stretch, but certainly bands that have very large followings, I believe, and just wanted to share that with everyone. If you'd like to leave your comments, I'd appreciate that, and we'll see you next time. Okay, bye.